G'day YouTube, Quacker John here. Today I have Alan with me to discuss the best way of running in, the Americans say breaking in, the Vulcan S. G'day Alan.
G'day, John. Thanks for inviting me.
No worries, mate. Alan is a subscriber of the channel, a regular on what is now the Quacker John Show, and a regular in the chat videos on my channel. He lives in Michigan, USA, and of course I'm in Brisbane, Australia. Now, people have asked me who is Alan, and so at the start of every chat video I will now include Alan talking about his background. Okay, so Alan, tell us a little bit about your maintenance background.
Yeah, that's kind of as you know, John. I'm retired, but I spent 33 years. I guess I could say this with the Dow Chemical Company, and my first 18 years with them was as a mechanic. I went through 3 years of intensive training, both in the classroom and then in the field with regards to everything that Dow Chemical had in their plants. They had several plants at the Los Angeles operations, and those plants, styron, epoxy, styrofoam, and others, and lots of different types of pumps, mechanical devices, air venting systems, hydraulics, all of that. So 18 years of that, along with some training in machine work and some training in welding. So the whole point was to become a well-rounded mechanic so that you could handle any problem or issue, troubleshoot anything within the plants, fix it, make repairs, whatever you had to do. So that's my background. I had.
Okay, let's get started. Alan, would you use synthetic oil while running in the bike?
To that question specifically, no. I even asked the local dealer, and I even emailed and talked to one of their service directors in Kawasaki in California, and the answer is no. Synthetic oils can be used after the bike has reached 1,200 miles or about 2,000 kilometers. That's their recommendation. Do not use synthetic oils prior to that for a myriad of reasons, but they want you just to use their recommended oil weights, a 10W40, maybe a 10W30, maybe a 20W50, depending on your ambient air temperatures wherever you live. But synthetics are not recommended until you have at least 1,200 miles on the bike, 2,000 kilometers, something in that range.
What's the single most reason why not to use synthetic oils on the new motor?
They Kawasaki never gave me a real answer to that. They just said that that's not what they recommend. They want the refined oils for the transmission and the clutch, and that's about all they said. So I'm assuming it has to do with the drive system. Maybe not so much with the engine itself, but with the transmission gears and the clutch mechanisms and stuff, the friction plates. I'm assuming that's what they were talking about.
Okay, so what servicing is required when breaking in the bike?
That's a good question, and I'm going to answer these questions kind of like if I had 3 daughters, and if they came and asked me questions about a new motorcycle or car, I'm going to answer them in that way. Likewise, if I had a son. So what they really require, and what I would strongly recommend for anybody, is if you buy a brand new Kawasaki, it doesn't matter the version, but in our case, the Vulcan S, go to the Kawasaki.com website, put in your VIN number, and they will pull up the owner's manual for that particular vehicle, whatever that is. In this case, the Vulcan S. And then you can download it, and you'll have it on your laptop, your computer, whatever, and constantly refer to that. But what they'll actually tell you on page 81, I got these notes here, but on page 81, they tell you for the first 800 kilometers or 500 miles, the max RPM Kawasaki recommends is 4,000 RPM. From 800 to 1,600 kilometers, that's about 500 to 1,000 miles. The max RPM is 6,000. And they basically tell you, do not race the engine after starting, even if it's warm, and run the engine 2 or 3 minutes to allow oil to reach all of the parts, engine parts, clutch, transmission, and all that. So those are the strong recommendations from Kawasaki. They'll caveat that by saying if you don't do that, you might have a broken engine versus a broken-in engine. And they'll also recommend, obviously, an oil change at 600 miles. And then again, I think it's at like 3,800. I mean, the first oil and filter change is like 600 miles, and then there's a long go between after that. It's not what I do personally. And then the other services that they're recommending, if you go to page 101, they're telling you to lube the chain about every 400 miles, 600 kilometers, and that's going to be based on how you ride it. If you ride it a lot in the rain or in sand, dirt, the rest of it, you'll be able to tell from the look of the chain whether it needs a good lube and cleaning. And they're telling you, again, on page 102 to actually adjust the chain or, do those type of things every 600 miles, every 1,000 kilometers, something like that. So they have some really strong recommendations on the initial break-in of the engine. And so that's kind of where they're at. You'll hear people talk about breaking in or running in an engine, but that'll get to your next question. So,
Well, can I say when I was running in my bike, there was what Kawasaki said in their manual, and then I heard a whole variant amount of opinions. So there wasn't much information about running in braking the Vulcan S. What have you been able to find out with your research, Alan?
my research basically comes from 20 plus years of mechanical background and the rest of it. And for me, I kind of followed the Kawasaki recommendation. I know that you and I have talked about this before. Your dealer told you to ride the bike moderately, whatever that means, for a definition. My dealer told me that if you took it up to 4,500 or 5,000 RPM in the first 600 miles, 500 miles, that would be okay. Just don't hold it at constant speed, and be mindful of engine RPMs and that stuff. Okay. Basically, for me, and what I understood from years of whatever, is that the Kawasaki Vulcan engine is a mixture of a lot of different types of metals, aluminums. There may be some alloys in there. There's obviously some hardened steels in your transmission and whatnot. And all of those metals have a different rate of coefficient of expansion, if you will. So as they heat up, they'll expand differently, and so they'll mate differently. And so for me, and in everything that I've ever done, I've always been mindful of, and this is what kind of got us on this conversation, of heat sinking, meaning that you start your engine, you let it warm up, and then you and if it's a brand new bike, mine only had like 0.9 miles on it. There's a lot of other things that have to get broken in. The tires need to be kind of worn in a little bit. The clutch, needs to be worn in a little bit to get full effectiveness. The brakes the same way. So you really want to be mindful of all of those different things mechanically working on that motorcycle. And so what I did is for the first 50 miles or so, I really was mindful of the RPMs. 4,000, I never lugged it. And when you ask about lugging, put your motorcycle in third or fourth gear and try and take off on the from a stop. You'll feel the engine kind of really hurting. That's lugging. You don't want to do that. That's bad for it. That puts a lot of pressure on things that you don't want. But I was mindful of all of that and just making sure that all my shifting was very smooth, my braking, all of that. And I would only run 5 to 10 miles, get the engine kind of warmed up and things going. And then I would park it and just let it completely cool down. And so what you've done now is you've heated everything up. Parts and pieces are meshing and wearing in, and then you've allowed everything to cool down. And then you go back off, and maybe the next day you do the same thing. And over a period of several runs, things are starting to wear in and break in and not break. What you really want, like we've talked about this before with the oils, the piston rings are probably the most critical, your clutch plates, that kind of thing. And so that's what I did. I did what I called heat sinking. Getting the engine up to temperature and then letting it cool all the way down. So things, kind of expand and contract and do their natural metallurgical parts. And then I put in a booster plug. I had about 50 miles and a different exhaust. And then I kept doing the same thing up to about 100 miles. Just being cognizant of the RPMs. Now, did I keep it under 4,000 the whole time? No. I did take it up to 4,500, but it wasn't a complete, roll on throttle, blah, all the way, blasting it. It was more just your riding, your shifting. And at 4,500 RPMs, you're running at around 55, 60 miles an hour. And then you roll down the throttle and just, you're just doing everything in an easy fashion. Now, I know that there's guys and there's opinions out there that say they break it in. You run it like you stole it. You dump the clutch, you run it hard, you run it fast, and that's the best way to break in an engine. Okay, I've known guys that have done that. I've known people that have done that. But if you're really looking for the best longevity, and we talked about this earlier, if you're looking for the longevity, you kind of want to follow Kawasaki's recommendations. You can run it hard. But as you found out with your KZ back in the day, and I know I've had friends, they may not last that long. They may go 7,000 to 8,000 miles and then start leaking oil and losing compression and all kinds of other things. So that's just kind of how I broke mine in, and that's the advice I would give my daughters. And during that period of time, obviously you're always checking your tires, making sure the pressures are good. Making sure that your chain is adjusted and lubricated correctly, that all your lights, if you've taken a motorcycle safety foundation class, you know all this stuff. You check your engine, make sure it's got oil. If it's got a cooling system like the Vulcan, you make sure it's got fluids in there. All your clutches, your levers, your brake levers, your lights, switches, headlights, all that stuff is working before you take off on your bike. That's the safety part of it. And if you do that and you kind of be mindful of the initial few hundred miles, I think you'll have a long, long, long life with the engine and the motorcycle. That's just, again, it's my opinion for what it's worth.
Okay, Alan, well, I think you answered my next question and last question. How did you run your biking in the first 100 miles? So, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Nope. I just think people just need to enjoy their motorcycles to the best of their ability. They'll get a lot of different opinions when they're asking people. Even the dealers are a little quasi. They're not real informational as far as how to break bikes, and everybody's got an opinion on that. But I would strongly recommend looking at the owner's manual, reading that, getting familiar with it. And understanding the ins and outs of the motorcycle. That's what I would recommend.
There's one more thing I'd like you to go over again. When you talk about heat cycles, that's the first time I'd heard of that. I know you've already mentioned it. Can you just say a little bit more about that?
Sure. One quick example here in the States, most car dealerships and places that changes tires. There's a lot of cars here in the States that have alloy rims or aluminum rims or even steel rims. If you have an alloy rim or an aluminum rim, and you're changing the tires or you're just getting them rotated, most of those repair shops will tell you to come back after 50 to 100 miles and have them re-torque the lug nuts. And the reason for that is you've got an aluminum alloy here and a steel hub, and you're locking them together, and through heat cycles, they do weird things. I've seen that in the mechanical stuff. And so you go back and you make sure all your lug nuts are there. And I guess there's been occasions here in the States where wheels have actually, run off from the car, which is not a good thing. The same thing happens with the motorcycle. And like I said, with the Kawasaki Vulcan S, you've got aluminum heads, you've got aluminum casings, you've got hardened steel bearings and transmission gears. You've got different metals with the chains and the drive sprockets, cams, bearings, all that stuff. And so all of those are going to heat and expand and contract differently from the outside. So those are the areas of that heat sinking. So once you get everything kind of up to temperature, everything's gotten to the max temperature in the engine. Maybe you're running 180 degrees on your water temperature, the oil's, up to temp. And so everything's expanded where it's going to be, and it's running. Now, once you stop it and it starts to cool down, you'll hear it crackling and popping and stuff. Everything's kind of shrinking back down to where it was, its normal state. It's just like anything else, expansion and contraction. And that expansion and contraction does put some wear on parts, and you want that to happen in a natural way as opposed to just, really, jerking stuff around. From a metallurgical standpoint and a mating, different mating surfaces within the engine. That's what I mean by heat sinking. It's an ongoing. Now, once the engine's all broken in, a lot of that is already in play. The mechanicals internally have already mated. They've done their thing, and you'll have an engine that will probably last a long, long, long time, longer than you'll probably own the bike, is what I'm thinking. As you were saying, your old KZ lasted about 20,000 kilometers or something like that, 12,000 miles in pro. But as we talked about, two things. One, it's an air-cooled engine, number one. And number two, you ran it hard. I mean, you ran it back and forth to work. You were, Mr. Stoplight Grand Prix. You ran it hard through the Outback. And, just after warranty, the engine was pretty much toast. It was not there. I'd never had that problem with any of the motorcycle engines or car engines that I broke in. However, I can attest that I've had friends that got 5, 6, 7,000 miles on their engines and started having problems, leaks. It would lose power. They were losing compression, all kinds of other things. And then complaining that the manufacturer, whoever it was, Yamaha, Honda, whoever, it was their fault for their particular motorcycle being underpowered or having a bad engine or this or that. Sometimes, and then I can speak of two occasions, sometimes it's the individual breaking in that engine. It's not the engineers designing it,
So in the first 100 miles, which is 160 kilometers, how long would you ride the bike before stopping and letting it cool down? I think you said for about 15 minutes.
Yeah, probably in the neighborhood of 10 miles-ish. It depended on traffic and what was going on. I don't know. It depended on a lot of different things, but I really didn't just get on the bike and just go for a 200-mile trip or a 20-mile trip. I would just kind of go around my neighborhood at speeds of 20, 25, 30 miles an hour, being easy on the clutch, the brakes, and all the rest of it. And after, I don't know, 10 miles, 15 minutes or so, park it in my garage and let everything cool back down. That's what I did, just to give the engine, and all the parts their due, in making sure that they broke in correctly and mated correctly with the different surfaces. The piston rings being the most critical. But
yeah, well, 10 miles is about 20 kilometres, 18 to 20 kilometres. Okay, Alan, well, thanks very much for your information. I'm sure people will find it helpful.
I'm hoping. I mean, I think when we talked before, you did the same thing with your first bike, and even with the Green Hornet. You just kind of rode it around your neighborhood, just to get used to it. Just let everything kind of, and then parked it. And I think all of that will play well with long-term, longevity. So.
No worries. We'll see you, mate.
Take care, man.
Thanks for watching my video. If you enjoy my videos, subscribe to the channel. The Quacker John Vulcan S show is on every Friday night at 10 PM Brisbane, Australia time. You are most welcome to join in. You are most welcome to join the Quacker John chat room, and the link for your invitation to join the chat room is in the comments under the video. I have published a book called My Kawasaki Vulcan SE Adventures, and it is available on the Amazon website for $5. See ya!